Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us this evening. We're going to start the event and the panel in a few minutes. We're just going to wait for a few folks to trickle in. All right, we'll get started with today's webinar with America Votes and Pro Georgia. My name is Yemi Adelmi. I'm so thankful to have you all join us today. My name is Yemi Adelmi. I'm one of the co-founders of Civic Eagle, and we build software that helps organizations and organizers with keeping track of state and federal policy and manage their policy work. I'm really thankful for the Civic Eagle team for putting this event together, as well as our wonderful guests who are joining us to share their insight on voting rights policy. Voting rights is a really important topic for us as individuals at Civic Eagle. And so as a company, we wanted to figure out how we can address some of the recent issues around voting restrictive laws that are popping up across the country. We found a great opportunity to partner with these two great organizations who use our tool in View to help track legislation and who are doing the really important work of fighting for democracy and for voting rights in Georgia, as well as helping to share information about how to fight this voter suppression legislation that's popping up across the country. So I'm really excited for you guys to have this information from Ashley and Adam. I want to kick off the evening with some introductions, and I have the pleasure of being here with these two fantastic individuals, Ashley Robinson, who is the Deputy State Director of America Votes Georgia, as well as Adam Sweat, who is the Director of Election Reform at Pro Georgia. I want to pass the mic over to Ashley to introduce herself, her background, and her work, and then we'll go over to Adam, and we'll get some questions going around the election and these bills.
Thanks so much, Yemi. Hi, everyone. So glad to be here with you all. To the Civic Eagle team, thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to be able to chat with your friends about the work that we're doing here in Georgia. And of course, always a pleasure to be here with Adam. He's a favorite of mine, and we do a lot of great work together. So really excited to be able to share another stage with Adam as well. My name is Ashley Robinson. Like Yemi mentioned, I am the Deputy State Director for America Votes Georgia. We are the C4 coordination table here in the state. We are a part of the National America Votes Network. And so what we do as a organization is we really do offer permanent advocacy and a campaign infrastructure where we provide coordination, data and targeting services, legislative strategy, support, you name it, whatever our partners need, we help provide it. And there's about over 60 groups that are part of our table structure that we help support. And they really cover a broad range of issues, whether it's environmental protection and justice, you've got public education, human and civil rights, LGBTQ plus issues, criminal justice, repro rights, labor, voting rights, democracy issues, you name it, Latinx and immigration, you name it, our partners really do cover the gamut of those issues. We're an incredibly diverse group of folks around our table. And they are so very passionate about the work that they do. And I'm truly honored and blessed to be able to work with them every day to be able to move the needle forward in our state. We really do at America Votes Georgia. We attempt to, we really strive to at least create some progressive social change in Georgia. with some deep issue awareness in the work that we do through our voter engagement. And we also advocate for progressive issues and policies. And so we'll talk a little bit later about what that looked like this legislative session and how we were able to coordinate, I think, in a very strong way with our C3 brothers and sisters on some of this stuff that came up during legislative session as well. So we've got a busy 2021 and 22 coming up, but we are really excited about all the work that we're going to do. And I think a little bit of background of kind of where I got my start in this work. I started working as chief of staff to former House Minority Leader Stacey Abrams when she was the House Minority Leader for about from 2011 to 2018. And so what was interesting about our work is that we not only serve legislative in a legislative capacity, but also in electoral capacity as well. So really got an opportunity to see the fullness of our work together, and then moved on to her campaign, and then working in some additional support organizations, as well as my own nonprofit organization. But really excited to be able to work at America Votes Georgia, where we do some really great coordination with our partners. So I'll stop there, and I'm assuming, Yemi, you want me to maybe pass it over to Adam.
Thank you, Ashley. I appreciate that. And Yemi, I appreciate you for this opportunity. And Civic Eagle, me and Ashley got together probably at least a year ago, if not longer, and started the conversation about Civic Eagle. And it turned out to be a great resource for both of our organizations. So it's great to be here. As they said, I'm Adam Sweat. I'm the Election Reform Director, and I work at an organization called Pro Georgia. We are the C3 to when Ashley said they're the C4 in state. They are the C4 side. We are the C3 side. We work with 38 partners. Some of them also work with Ashley. Some of them are just C3, and they range from issues like reproductive rights, healthcare justice, criminal justice, LGBTQ, civil and human rights. But what binds them all, or what unites them all, is their belief in voting rights protections. And so everything that we do at Pro Georgia is really geared towards protecting and enhancing Georgia citizens' right to vote. And as you can imagine, between the election in 2020 and then the legislative session in 2021, it has been an interesting ride. And there's a lot of reason to be alarmed by SB 202. There's a lot of reason to be really optimistic about Georgia and how the progressive movement has really been mobilized and been effective. And you see that, we see it in state, we see it nationally, and the impact that it's had in DC. So I guess that's kind of the overview of Pro Georgia. And much like Ashley said, our work is all designed to support our partners and their goals. So whether that's their voter registration efforts, their get out the vote efforts, any sort of data need or request that they may have to be for the success of their operation, their organization, we support them. And we also take pride in re-granting a substantial amount of our total budget to our partners so they can facilitate this work, and people can be paid livable wages for the work that they are conducting. A little bit of background about myself is I worked at the Capitol for about 7 years in various PR and communications roles. Before I went to Atlanta Technical College, I led their PR and marketing department. And then when you work at the Capitol, I think Ashley would agree, there's just something that lures you back. You think you're ready to go. And I spent probably 3 years away, but it just brought me back in, and I probably won't make that mistake again. I really enjoy it. And it's one of those things that we get to the end of session and it's like, wait, why do I love this? Why do I do this? But if you love it and you like the legislative process, it's really hard to stay away from it.
Totally relatable. Before, doing startup life, I started my career at the state legislature in New York, and those late nights, budget season, I don't know what keeps us coming back, but there's something about the energy of like being so close to policy maybe, and being able to see the inner workings of how the sausage is made, so to speak. Well, let's take it there then. I mean, Georgia had a lot of attention all of last year's election cycle. And we found out in January that Senators Ossoff and Warnock were headed to Washington, thanks to a lot of the work that you all were doing on the ground and in the legislatures. I want to know a little bit about your experience in 2020 and how it differed outside of, we know the pandemic definitely had a huge impact on the election and how work was able to be operated on the ground. But I would love to know what else you sensed in the difference between 2020 and maybe previous election cycles you've been a part of. Let's start with Ashley.
Yeah, I would say that 2020 brought a different type of energy or a sense of urgency to our work. Because we knew that everything was on the line. And for those of you who may be familiar with C3s and C4s, I want to help you understand, if you aren't as familiar, C4s, we are more of the political arm. We do more of the legislative advocacy work. We also do some of that direct voter contact on the political side. So what C3s can't do, we do. And so the easy way is to know that is, we can know what C3s do. They just can't know everything that we're doing. So we did a lot of engagement with our communities and really kind of doing some targeting around which communities made the most sense for us to engage with. We didn't skip a beat. I mean, when the pandemic hit, we were already kind of gearing up for what we knew was going to be an interesting 2020, but nothing could prepare us for what we were about to face. And so we had to have very real conversations with our partners around what does that pivot look like for them. A lot of them kind of moved into some check-ins with their membership and with their communities and making sure that folks were good and there was granting and Pro Georgia also did a number of those things and really shout out to them for really kind of helping hold up our marginalized communities and the people that needed them most to make sure that they were solid during the thick of that pandemic. But we wanted to make sure that we didn't, stop our phone calls, our text messaging, and even, when we were kind of nervous about going out on the doors, we just kind of chalked it up to the fact that we can't wait. We have to actually go out and talk to our communities and talk to our voters because we're moving into a space where our voters, may not be as well educated around some of our candidates. They may not be as well educated around the issues and particularly around how to vote by mail. And so I think that is a place where both the C3s and the C4s came together to make sure that we had an informed electorate around what they kind of had to do out of necessity, which was voting by mail. So we picked up where we needed to. We sent out tons of absentee voting applications, which is one part of SB 202 that we like to call the anti-America Votes provision. But we sent out a lot of information and those mailings and text messages and phone calls. I mean, I think we did like close to 30 million phone calls and texts and about 10 million door knocks total. So, we just didn't stop because we didn't have the luxury to. It was way too important not to.
Yeah. I can't agree with you more. I mean, I think going into 2020, if you look at 2018, 2016, there were certainly things that were happening in Georgia where more attention was being placed on Georgia, whether it was certain races or certain counties that were voting differently than they had in the past 30 or 40 years. Things were starting to change, but a lot of that change can be tied to the work that the Pro Georgia State Table and the America Votes Table have been doing as it relates to voter registration and to really, we do when it used to be in person, we do the New Americans ceremonies where we, celebrate, immigrants that just get their citizenship and make sure that they are ready to vote and ready to go when it's time to head to the polls. But so COVID brought a lot of challenges, and everything did have to shift digitally. But that also, there wasn't time to really belabor the fact that we couldn't do business as we thought we were going to do. Right? It was too important, and even if it wouldn't have been such the critical election it was, it would have still been as important because they moved election deadlines.
Yep.
They were encouraging people to vote by mail or use drop boxes. People didn't even know that was not even a thing before last year. And absentee, well over the majority of Georgians vote in person. That's just the reality. So we had to focus. One thing that I was heavily involved in were statewide billboard campaigns, radio campaigns, not just doing the and coordinated social campaigns and town halls and making sure that we're connecting to people to try to, whatever those barriers are to voting, what is the barrier, and we try to remove them or help individuals eliminate those barriers so they can fulfill their right to vote. Something that should not be hard. It should not be difficult. Georgia has an unfortunate history of suppressing votes that dates back to our founding, and while there has been a lot of progress, SB 202 is a clear attack on Black and brown voters in Georgia. There's no other way to read it. There's no media. It's directly aimed at people that the people in power don't want to see realize their full potential, their full power at the ballot box.
Yeah. And I think what I would like to add to just very briefly is it was so important, I think, for our respective work in the C3 and the C4 side that we stayed the course. While the C3s were so in the trenches, and I'll tell you, I don't think there is a more creative table that is out there than Pro Georgia to come up with different ways to make sure that we are hitting communities who may seem like they're off the radar, and finding a way to actually get them and to register them and to do that voter education while we were doing, additional voter education and that political work too. So I think it's important when we talk about that level of coordination, how we had to pivot during the pandemic, that we stay laser focused on our work in our respective buckets.
Yeah. Well, and no, I have nothing to add. That was perfect.
I was gonna, before we segue into SB 202 that you brought up, I wanted to kind of double tap on what you both were talking about, where it seemed like there was a emphasis on collaboration, or you're propping up the Pro Georgia table, but you were mentioning having billboards and working on other tactics, new tactics to educate voters. How did you go about that work? It sounds like you relied on partnerships and relationships of your table. What was that like, and how did you go about creating that table?
Well, so the Pro Georgia State table has been around, I believe, since 2012, but the campaigns that we ran during 2020 and the ideas that we had a legislative campaign. We have a campaign we're running right now, don't bother my ballot. It comes from really what I view my main function is, listening to partners and hearing what are they are the boots on the ground. They are the people that are in community centers, even during COVID, or interacting with people at the doctor's office or at the grocery store. What are they? We have to listen to our 38 partners first and foremost, and what are their needs, and what is the most effective way to get the message out of what they're trying to accomplish. Secondly, we we do have an amazing communications firm that really helps bring a lot of the kind of policy or the meatier stuff to light, and helps us, consider things like, who's your audience in this part of the state, or what's different about Gwinnett County than's different about Henry County, and how do all those things overlap and coexist? Because we can't talk to everyone like they're, just because you fall into one demographic doesn't mean the same message or the same graphic works for you. So, but that's the comms firm is really helpful. And then I think the last part of it is, we come up with campaigns, we listen, we collaborate, but we also encourage our partners. I will never know what is best for a partner in terms of their message and how they're best reaching their who they're trying to support. So we do also encourage our partners to, like, if you want to take our social media graphics and you need to make changes, or you need to, that's why we're here, to support their efforts and give them tools to succeed. And we understand that while we're united in a common mission of voting rights advocacy and protection, they have 38 individual organizations, and they need to have the power and the ability to do what's best for them.
Y'all are an awesome partner, because that sounds like a true partnership where they also take, they're able to really apply to the communities that they serve. That's awesome. And so it seems like you're going to have to rely on a lot more partnership work and coalition work and education work because of the effects of SB 202. So let's start talking about that a bit. And, for anyone who's listening who may not be aware of what SB 202 has done in Georgia, can we give them a little bit of background of what this bill does, what are the implications, and maybe also if you're seeing trends in other state legislatures that are picking up some of these policies? You get off with Ashley.
Yeah, sure. So 202 is a 98-page, or was a 98-page bill that was essentially drafted to, quote unquote, restore voter confidence, because apparently the voters of Georgia were just so, had such low confidence and really believed in all of this fraud. And our voting systems were so terrible that it needed an overhaul. And what we know,
I have to say it, but Ashley and I were and are and will be very confident in the election results.
Right.
They did not ask us. We were very confident.
Yes, and we were so, and they were so confident, and the state was so confident in their in the system that they found no fraud. So I'm not sure who they asked, outside of a certain subset of folks who maybe didn't want the electoral outcomes that we gave them here in Georgia. But that's essentially what SB 202 did. I mean, it's a number of things that I like to just think about SB 202 as just gaslighting in 98 pages. It's such egregious form of legislation that really hinders the ability to be able to, it's suppressing the vote, but it's also just them moving the goalpost again. And so, I mean, we can talk about some of the different provisions in it. I mean, there's so many pieces of the legislation. It's so many, I had to write them down, from my old notes, like our drop boxes that Adam mentioned, the ID that's required for you to vote. There's changes in our early voting hours. Let's talk about absentee ballot deadlines. The mobile voting units that Fulton County, which is which is Atlanta, what they did and how innovative it was, that it's now they can't do it anymore unless it's an emergency decree from the governor. I mean, it's now a misdemeanor to hand out food and water to the elderly or to some kids. I mean, there's so many different things that are part of this bill that are really terrible. And when we see that these other measures are being done in other legislatures, I think it's important to note that these are done in mostly Republican legislatures. but also that this is not something that they just did overnight. I mean, obviously, this is a well-coordinated effort to make sure that on the state level, that we are able to kind of prevent the opportunity of the changing demographics that are happening in our communities and in our states, from some of those folks to be able to have equal and fair access to the ballot. And so that's essentially what SB 202 did. And of course, if you want to be the first of anything, you don't want to be the first state and other states to follow you after passing really harmful legislation. But that's just what we do in Georgia. We're just known for just doing the worst and everybody following after us. So there we go.
And at Commons, you guys can course correct and get the state back on track, and then everybody else as well.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, I think it's important to remember too that Ashley gets to say the R and the D words, and I do not. But the current party in power is the ones who relaxed absentee ballot voting in 2005. Okay, and so that's an important footnote in this whole thing. And then last March, when we go into lockdown and quarantine, the current Secretary of State sends every registered Georgia voter an absentee ballot request, encouraging them to vote by absentee and to utilize something new that they did with an emergency rule decision, voting drop boxes, which were placed at secure, camera-monitored government facilities, 24-hour surveillance that you could just drive by, put your ballot in there, it goes into, and then they pick it up later. And so all of these things happen. This wasn't, 50 years ago. This was last year for the pandemic. So even if you can get aside that this is directly about race, because it is, the hypocrisy from a public health standpoint to still during a pandemic, and this law was passed before vaccine distribution was widely available, and the pandemic's not over. And so you tell people last year to do X, Y, and Z, and then you come back and attack the very system that you are in charge of and that you told people this is what to do. And so last year, I think Ashley would agree with me, the absentee ballot encouragement, I thought that was great. I thought the drop boxes were great. I was very worried about people being scared to vote. And I wasn't sure that, I don't have always the utmost confidence that every single polling location can do what needs to be done to keep people medically safe, right? So I think we were glad that happened. But that also, this back and forth from a public policy standpoint just just creates continual problems for us in terms of educating the public of what are the boundaries that you're playing in? How do you get to vote? And just last year we told you to do it this way, and now because of this law, we're gonna have to flip it all up. Which I'm not going to sit around crying over that because it doesn't matter. I mean, we have to be prepared for this to be law, but it's just very confusing, and you just don't want people. I think that's why Ashley and I can speak for both of us, we haven't really stopped since the pandemic began in March, because even though this is an off year, there's municipal races and people, it's going to be harder. We have to assume without judicial intervention or Congress passing federal voting rights protections, these will go into law. And that means, that the work that Ashley and I are doing at our respective organizations, that we have to be ready to ensure that people can still make their voices heard.
Yeah.
I don't, anything else. I just truly believe we don't have anything else. You can talk about reforming healthcare, you can talk about reforming education, and all that stuff is essential. Transportation investments, all that is essential to a, healthy democracy, but we don't have a dang thing if people can't vote, and people can't vote for who they want to.
Yeah. And I think Adam brings up such an important point around specifically around you tell a voter one thing, and now I have to do a separate thing. And not only are you now restoring this lack of voter confidence that you said was why you initially put this in place, but then you have a message point for every part, every provision that is in this bill. And Adam and I can talk about, the process and how it went, because it lacked so much transparency. There was so little room for folks to have a seat at the table around what do we need. We didn't actually assess what the actual problems were. We can all agree that there were some inconsistencies. Folks read all across the country, and I'm sure across the world, how long our lines were here in the state, some of the issues that we may have had, but that requires us to actually dig in a little deeper in our counties, and talking to our county board of elections folks, and talking to our voters around what do we need to see as an overhaul in our election system that is not just maintained or is not just put out by some of our state leaders. So it's really unfortunate to see that, in their attempt to expand voting access, they're still suppressing it. And there's so many, I think, messaging points, which you can tell is their concerted effort. Let's talk about, early voting and how they'll talk about we expanded early voting for you all. You all didn't have this many Saturdays. You didn't have this many weekend days to vote before. We actually codified drop boxes. But drop boxes were an emergency order before, but now we've codified them. But there's so many limitations to how you can use them, and not just on our communities of color, but on our persons of different abilities, on our seniors. I mean, there's so many folks
people who work 9
to 5.
Who don't have the ability to use their job and go to vote. Yeah, and that you brought up, the drop box, there's so many problems with it, but the drop boxes now have to be inside a county election office, which is the same place you vote. So if you're going to go there, and you can only use them the hours they're open. And so I'm sure you'll hear people tell you about Sunday voting. So they did put into law Sunday voting, but they also limited the times that counties can early vote during the entire early voting period. So you're not going to hear me complain about them saying mandating Sunday voting. Obviously, that's something that is positive, but not at the expense of all these other things. So don't, if you hear people talking about, well, they did this for early vote. No, they did not. It's smoke and mirrors, because you can say we gave you this, but if you took away, the head and the body of everything else, then what do we have?
The provisional ballots, to me, is probably one of the worst parts of the bill too. If a voter votes in the wrong precinct, typically what normally used to happen is I voted in the wrong precinct. I didn't know where I needed to go, but I still was eligible to vote in everything else I could vote for. So that was everything federal. That was probably some other stuff. Now the entire ballot is void. So I can't vote for anything. So now it is incumbent upon us as the C3s and the C4s to make sure that we have a well-informed electorate around what to do now that 202 has passed, and we get to see how do we use that in our municipal elections and going into our statewide elections in 22.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, no, please go.
I was actually going to go there and ask about, it seems like the solution, like you said, we can't cry over spilled milk, but what do we do now? And it seems like it comes down to education, voter education, and really spelling out all these different changes. What is your approach to doing that? And what are some of the strategies you'll be using to reach voters, to inform them about the impact of 202?
I can start. I mean, I think on the C4 side, there's some advocacy that goes into that. There's some tactical things that we have to do, but specifically, there's also that education. And I think the great thing about both of our table structures, and particularly our partners, what they do so very well is that they know how to pivot and they know how to talk to their communities in the best way. And so they get really creative in figuring out, how to do it. There was one point where we were concerned about needing to put printers in counties. And if that was going to be the case, we were just going to have to buy a whole lot of printers and have them in different parts of the state, and make sure our voters were able to get there. I mean, I would assume, or, I would think that some of our partners, if we're thinking about, the ID requirements, and, our Speaker of the House mentioned or made available like voter IDs. I want to see voter ID booths available for folks to go sign up to get a voter ID for that 3% of people that don't have either a state ID, a driver's license, military number, whatever the case may be. And sure, everyone may have a social security number. I want to make sure that our voters are doing that. And so I think that those are some of the things that our partners are thinking about. We're really talking to the communities that need to know most, particularly in our rural parts of the state. And for our voters who may not be the most, I won't even say the most well-informed voters, but they aren't the most consistent voter. And so these are folks that you also have to help along the way and make sure that they know these are now the new guidelines that you have to vote with. And no one likes anything unfair. I don't care if you're black, white, whatever. Like, we don't like, and I think the state of Georgia and a lot of our voters do not agree with unfairness in any process. And so that is something that we've also have to uplift, that this is what happened, not only through the process, this is who we've had to call out during SB 202's drafting and while it was going through committee. But this is what we also need for you all to do to help kind of shepherd this thing along, because, this is an unfair attempt to silence your voice at the ballot box. This is as simple as it gets. And so no one wants that. I mean, everyone wants the opportunity to be able to vote their conscience in the way that they need to, but you have to be able to do it easily and fairly and without, and conveniently. And that's just not the case here.
Not at all. And I think for us, I mean, we're already running our Don't Bother My Ballot, Get Ballot Ready initiative, where we are really taking the 4 major parts of this law and breaking it down in really simple, clear, and concise language. So we will continue to promote that through a variety of channels, whether that's on social media or through billboards or through radio ads as we approach deadlines and election dates. We also, our voter registration efforts really never stop. And so the voter education material that we will have for partners to use, it will also be used, in our voter registration efforts. It will be used in our Get Out the Vote efforts. And so it'll be a multi-layered approach as we approach the elections in November, and then as we look towards 2022. And I think it's important to be, to be realistic and to be honest with people, but then also to come, to eliminate fear and we still want people to trust the system, right? The last thing we want to do is people to think, well, screw it, my vote really doesn't matter now. Like, it doesn't matter. And that's the last thing that we want. We want people to say, like, listen, we know this is messed up and we're fighting to change that. But in the meantime, the only solution for everybody who is, who cares about voting rights in Georgia is to vote. And something that Ashley can talk more on, or can be more, have more fun with. But the reality is every person who voted for that bill or who signed that bill into law is up for re-election in November 2022. And some of them, because of primaries, might not make it that far. But that's another education point. And I don't mean that politically.
Right.
From my perspective, I mean that from empowering voters with the knowledge, with the like, it is bigger than you think it is. And this is why you need to be talking to your mom and your dad and the person on the train next to you, or whoever gives you your coffee, because we, meaning people who want to see, want to protect you, voter rights, want to protect human rights, want equality in healthcare and education and our state government and our federal government, this is what you have to do, and it starts at the ballot box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that voting is a fundamental right for all of us. Certainly. I was gonna mention, I think another tactic that we both are utilizing is redistricting, which is coming up, which dovetails, I think, nicely into what the fight we just had, the fight we're coming into. We have the C3, they have a redistricting alliance that meets regularly, and we meet with them to make sure that we are in alignment on the things we can align on around our strategy and what kind of voter education are we doing? How do we make sure that our voters also know that redistricting is part of our ability to vote? And, the chopping up of the maps and, us focusing on the gerrymandering piece of it and all of those types of things. And so, that's another opportunity that we have, which is, I think, so timely right now that we can focus a little bit further on, voting rights as it relates to redistricting as well.
Yeah.
What about the legislative side? Do you think there's an opportunity for new legislation to repair some of the damage of 202?
No, it'll get worse before it gets better. There will be more. It'll be a campaign year, and I would expect to see more of the same before you see any sort of restoration of voting rights. And I'm not trying to be funny, but I mean, I think at this point it really depends on the Justice Department and what they're going to allow to stand. But I would fully expect to see, and I hate to say this, I love Georgia, I love Atlanta, I'm born and raised here, but being the leader of anti-voter rights legislation, you will probably see another go at it in January of next year.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with Adam until we've got some folks in office that can help change some of those things. And you would want to believe that enough public pressure would move the needle forward and call for some change in the legislation, but I highly doubt it. The way that they've positioned it now is that they've really saved our voting system here in Georgia, that they've protected it, that they've defended our democracy and our ability to not have fraud, and expanding voter access and all of those things. And so I don't anticipate them doing anything that's allowing more access for us. And the thing that we have to do for that is, just continuing to fight. Our partners have done, I think, yeoman's work on getting our corporations involved and making sure that they are putting pressure on legislators. So I don't know how much is going to move, but I don't think it's going to get any better. It's probably going to stay right where it is, because if they do anything more, it may be a little destructive for them. But this is about as much as we're going to get until we are able to move the needle in some of these legislative seats and turn back some of these harmful provisions, or we get new state leadership.
Yeah, one of you mentioned federal legislation that might be able to kind of override this. Can you speak a little bit to that and what's going on at the federal level as far as voting rights legislation?
So what do we have right now? We have HR1, we have SR4, and then SR1, right? That's kind of the trio right now, Ashley.
Yep.
So I think HR1 would be the pie in the sky, what everyone would like to see in Ashley and mine space in terms of the maximum protections it provides It provides voters across the country, and especially in places like Georgia or Alabama, Mississippi, anywhere these kind of things are coming down the pipeline. I do. I just lost my train of thought. I am so sorry.
No, but what I will say is a lot of our partners are working to encourage our voters to call their legislators, to call senators, to call our Congress folks, to make sure that we are passing HR 1, because that's what's going to protect us. That's what's going to make sure that's what's going to make sure. No, it's all good, Adam. I always got you.
It's a long day. Oh my God.
To turn back the hands of time and to get us right back on track. I mean, we don't have the safety net that we had before, in our, particularly in our southern states. So it's the Wild Wild West down here. They're doing any and everything that they can. And so when we also think about our fair maps too, like, if any of our maps were to pass pre-clearance, I mean, it's really scary to see, how far some of these state leaders, particularly in more conservative-led legislatures, are going to take a lot of these measures. We weren't able to see our anti-trans sports bill make it past the finish line here in Georgia, but that's not the case in Arkansas, they reversed a veto. I mean, seriously, I'm not sure, like what the state Republican takeover is looking like in some of these legislatures or why, but we see that this is now their theory of change. This is now their method. They weren't able to win on the federal level, and so taking it down to the state legislative level as well, where it affects people more directly and more quickly. Is their strategy now. And so I think that's something to pay close attention to when your state legislatures, if you're not here in Georgia, but you're other places across the country or even across the world, if you're tuning in. But that's what's happening now. And I think that is, it could be considered clever, but they always figure out a way to pivot and to do something different. You know what I mean?
I would call it terrifying. But
it is.
The federal intervention with the laws they're considering right now, we think the John Lewis Act, Voting Rights Act, probably has a more realistic shot given the political realities. We have to. I mean, I don't want to say we have to, but we really, really need them to intervene. But the work continues regardless, and the importance of getting people out to the polls remains the same. But if y'all are, people on this call are across the country and want to know, how you can help or what you can do about what's going on in Georgia or other states like it, call your congressmen and women, call your senators, help us advocate for this change that we really need to see. So state, these Wild West legislatures can't just keep doing whatever they want to without consequence.
That's right.
Because the advocacy that Ashley and I are both involved in we're trying to arm our partners with stuff to be effective at the state level and the federal level. And there's a lot of moving pieces. So.
Yeah. That's a really good point. The federal legislation will definitely help across the country. For folks who are on the advocacy side and the policy research side, what kinds of tips do you have for them in fighting or approaching the voting rights restrictions in their states as it pertains to coordinating efforts with other organizations, sharing resources? We mentioned that the folks that coordinated or that brought SB 202 up, it was a very well coordinated effort, and so coordination seems to be a big part of making movements go and become successful. What are some thoughts around coalition building and building these partnerships, working with communities to amplify or scale up some of the work that needs to happen at state legislatures?
I would say communication is key. Constant communication is key. What we did here in Georgia between our C3s and our C4s for the information that we could share amongst one another. And I think that was, a perfect time where we could be kind of in lockstep with each other around message, around tactic, around, approach. We talked a lot. We made sure that we hosted a nightly call, C3s and C4s, to talk about what was happening. There were a number of groups that were kind of leading the charge on some of the legislative advocacy work. There were other groups that were doing more on the corporate accountability front. There were groups that were doing a lot around protest. So everyone kind of had a lane. There were a lot of groups that were just providing research, which is what we all needed, right? So I think if you understand kind of where your organization lies and what your strengths are, play into those things, but also make sure that you are communicating very well. Also communicate with the legislators. We worked very closely as much as we could, particularly on the C4 side, with our legislators to make sure that they were armed and ready with the information that they needed in preparation for those committee hearings that they were in. And we wanted to make sure that our C3s and our C4s collectively were in the building. So there were calls for them to come to the Capitol to make sure they were testifying. And we had a little bit of testimony training, and we made sure everyone was set. And then we offered talking points to everyone. And everyone gave, I think, a different perspective, whether you were from the environmental side, or you were from the human rights side, or you were from communities of color, or persons with different abilities, or whatever your lane was. We wanted to make sure that you were on record as an advocate against this particular piece of legislation and why. And that wasn't easy. I mean, the chair of that election integrity committee, Barry Fleming, was cold as ice. It was not very easy. And you also saw, like, on the Senate side too, like, we had early morning meetings, some as early as 8, maybe a little earlier at 7.
Some not live streamed during.
Yeah, that were not live streamed.
Yeah.
And so it was impossible for you if you were in another part of the state. You couldn't even tune in if you wanted to. You couldn't really offer testimony, public testimony. So it was very difficult. And I think it's important to have folks that are on the inside who are helping kind of run some of the plays to make sure that the rest of the group knew this is what we need you all to do, and we were armed every day for that fight. So every day, every morning, every evening, we did check in with one another.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think you need to be really honest about, a legislative session is really a blip in time of the current political picture of your state, right? So for us, Ashley and I came into this knowing that that the party in power, the people in power, would be looking to retaliate for what happened in November and January. So we knew we were going to play defense. Ashley and I didn't go into this session thinking, oh my God, we're going to get same day voter registration passed, and we're going to, get X, Y, and Z, all these great email, I don't even know any kind of idea. We knew that wasn't going to be the case, but no matter what state you're in, there is some way for you to be active in advocating for voter rights protection and education. We have more people than ever voted in the last election, and we still had millions of people who didn't vote. And we want to be a democracy that everyone participates in. So I would just tell you, if you're in a state like Georgia, coalition building and being in partnership with like-minded organizations to really amplify your position and to advocate together at your state legislature is huge, is very, very important. And then, that the other side of it is more so what Ashley's work is knowing that every 2 or every 4 years, these positions are up for re-election. And keeping that balance. But, if you're in a state like Georgia, advocate for greater protections. If you're in a state that's really strong and y'all keep pushing, because Georgia looks to y'all to say, look, this is how they do it. Like if they do it in Oregon or if they do it in Connecticut, then we need to be doing it in Georgia. And
yes. People with sense are doing it this way.
Exactly. Like, you don't always really enjoy being compared to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana. No offense to anyone from there, but I'm talking about in some of the more, these civil, social justice issues. It's like, you want to look towards the states that are leading the way. So no matter where you are, I would say there's some way to get involved in voting rights or voter education, and really to those people who say, I don't vote, I never voted, I don't care, So
yeah. Let's take it a little bit lighter then. I mean, speaking on the fact that, in some states it is a bit of a struggle to advocate for voting rights and some legislation that we think is common sense, but Georgia was able to elect two senators who seem better aligned on these topics. I want to know what that felt like in January, or maybe even before January. You had the inclination that things were gonna to be in your favor, but what was that feeling like? What was the first thing you did when you heard the news? How did your organization celebrate? Did you celebrate? Did you get a time to rest a bit?
Well, I'll say for me, we didn't get an opportunity to do much. We had to quickly pivot from election day into the runoff, and that was a lot of work. We made, I think, about as many phone calls and texts and door knocks as we did probably during the general in such a short window of time. But I think it's good to see your hard work pay off. Like, you've been in the trenches, you've been in your computer, you've looked at the data, you've done all of these things, and you're really in the thick of it, and then you come outside of it, and you have an electoral victory of that is game changing, that really kind of shifts the narrative in the country, and little old Georgia did that. So it's certainly a space where you are encouraged that the work that you have been doing, that our partners have been doing, that a lot of our leaders who have been doing this work for many years, far before I got here, or I'm sure Adam and others, that a lot of their hard work, it really paid off. And this was almost 10 years, about 10 years or more in the making for Georgia. And so, I don't anticipate for other states where you were kind of on the cusp of, a possible win like that, or you may be able to take some victories home that may be small, but you're still chipping away, at what is possible for your state, that it won't take that long when you have true coordination to that degree. I think the one thing that I have learned from even working alongside Leader Abrams for so long is when she first started as when she was voted in as minority leader, and then we started thinking through what our strategy would look like for our work. You don't think about lanes. You don't think about, who's responsible for what. And I think at the time, there were a lot of broken systems in our ethos politically and within our state that had not been fully realized yet. And so we had to assume responsibility, even just for a little while, of some of the things that needed to happen in the state. And I think if you take that approach, that we are all in this together. Yes, there are C3s, there are C4s, there's the party, there's our legislators and their staff and everyone else, that there are roles and responsibilities that everyone has to take on. But if you are so locked in on whose role it is and who's supposed to do that and they didn't do this, you're not really going to get to progress ever. And so it's great to see. I want to make sure that we are maintaining those wins, which I think is more of a conversation when we talk about our donor class or our organizers and how we make sure that we have a year-round type of operation that really doesn't stop that momentum, that our voter registration is continuing to go up, and that we are implementing new programs, we have to keep the momentum going, because not only does the federal electoral wins make our state blue, but we've got state legislative wins that we have to have too. We have policies that we need to be able to enact, and to bring progress to our state. So it's great, but it's just the start of what is possible for the rest of the ticket, the rest of our political infrastructure here within the state.
Thanks for that perspective. Yeah, it's a lot of work. Hats off to both of you for being so plugged into the ecosystem, being aware of all parts of the ecosystem that really make the movement go and move, and not just taking individual parts for granted. So I really appreciate your perspective and being able to share with us all the parts of the engine that make it work. We're going to close out our event in a few minutes, so I want to leave some time and some space for any questions from the audience that's tuned in. If you have any questions for Ashley or Adam, feel free to use the chat bot to ask your question, and I'll pass it off to you two to wrap up any advice, tips, lasting words that you can impart on us that will help us support you and your work and support the movement in general. Would love to really leave the audience off with a call to action to help fight against these voter suppressive laws and really fight for our rights to vote, like you've all been able to share with us the significance of.
Well, thanks so much, Yemi. And again, thank you, Adam, and always a pleasure to be here, and to the Civic Eagle team. It has been I've been thrilled to be able to talk a little bit about my work and our coordination and partnership with Pro Georgia. I would say, as folks who are either in state here in Georgia, or if you're in other parts of the country, if there are suppressive laws that are within your sphere of influence, or that's happening, partner with an organization, volunteer with them. If you want to volunteer with some of our organizations, we would love to have you. There are virtual opportunities for you to tune in and tap into the work that we're doing here in Georgia, because I want to make sure that everyone knows that the ecosystem is full. There's a lot of different parts of it that need support. And so if that means that you can give a little bit of money, if you can give a little bit of your time, or if it's some of your network, please offer those things to the issues that matter most to you, whether it's reproductive justice, whether it's environment, LGBTQ plus issues, whatever it is. I encourage you, if you aren't already volunteering with an organization that is doing some work in your area, please do so. But you can also reach out to me via email, and I'll be happy to plug you into one of our organizations, or to identify some different ways. I always like to think about odd bedfellows. If there's new creative, non-traditional ways that we can continue to get the message out to our folks here in Georgia. So I think they're gonna put our emails here up, but my email is arobinson@americavotes.org, arobinson@americavotes.org, and I would love to connect with you and talk a little bit more about how you can be helpful to not only America Votes Georgia, but to our partners that are in this fight.
Just to echo what Ashley said, my email is asweat@progeorgia.org. Feel free to reach out to me if you're looking to do things more in the space of voter education, or the non-political work. But I think just to kind of sum up kind of different things we've been talking about, I don't care where you are, where you're from, what you do. There are injustices and inequities happening, whether it's in your home or your neighborhood or your school or your workplace, or at the state legislature, or at places where there's real power. So if you truly are invested in seeing a country that people have an opportunity and a chance equally to live their best lives. Search out those injustices, search out the ways that you can show up and stand up. And like Ashley said, that could be, there's a million different ways you can get involved. And it can be something as simple as like, help standing up for an old lady that's at the bus stop and something really bad's going down. I don't know how that may look in your life. If you're interested in what we're doing at Pro Georgia or getting connected to our partners, I'm happy to connect you. But we'll just encourage everyone to really try to see it in your everyday life. And it doesn't have to be a big commitment or a big, I'm going to do this 3 nights a week for the next, forever. And it can be, it certainly can be. There's a lot of work to be done, but don't overburden yourself with what you can do in your own sphere of influence.
I love that. Everyone has a role to play, and so to speak.
Absolutely.
Smallest to the biggest, for sure. Thank you both for that. We do have a question in the chat. We have a question that says, which state do you think is the most concerning when it comes to upcoming voting-based legislation? Yeah, I know we have similar bills happening, similar to 202. What other states are top of mind as most concerning, in your opinion?
I would say, yeah, I know that I know Florida just passed, the governor just signed their stuff, but I was thinking about Arizona, like it just came top of mind to me for some reason. And I know that is another swing state that has a lot of electoral victories around like changing demographics and things like that, but particularly, Texas as well.
I was thinking Texas and Florida.
I know I've had conversations with folks in Texas around what's going to happen with Texas, when they're going to flip. I don't know if it's going to be that soon, but I do know that any state I think that is on the margins or is like a lighter blue state is one that you have to pay, I think, a little closer attention to, because the communities just need to know a little bit more around what's actually happening. And so I think there's a lot of work that can be done in those states as well. But I would say Texas, Arizona are probably some of the ones that I'm thinking about. I also think about, Arkansas and, what they just did with the anti-trans sports bill. And, I love the South. I'm from the South. And so I'm a big advocate for like the potential that the South has. But I know that some of the demographics aren't as, they're not as promising like they are here in other states. But there are some opportunities for some of our states, like Mississippi, I think, has the numbers. It's just going to take a lot of work. But I do think that there are opportunities for us to really kind of change the needle in some of these areas. And I think to Adam's point too, around, everyone has a role here. Like the barrier of entry, honestly, for anything political or civic engagement is so low. And not to say that, it's like a low threshold, but it certainly is a low threshold to even just get in it. You can just start just by volunteering. But to maintain our wins are very high. So I really do ask you, whoever you are, utilize your network. If you're an accountant, if you're a lawyer, if you're a teacher, there are so many skill sets that you have that you can lend to the movement and to the moment that would be a blessing to another organization in some respects. So just get into the fight and see where you go from there.
Yep.
I think that's a great note to end on, actually. Empowering our audience to take action. The barrier of entry into electoral reform and protecting votes is very low. The movement needs you. And I want to thank you both again for spending some time with us. I know you're both very busy and working on very important things. So your time is super valuable, and really appreciate your ability to really break it down to us, break down this really important issue and give us a lay of the land of what's going on.
Well, thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure just sitting here speaking with you. But also thank you for InView, which was, I think, a lifesaver to our partners, too. Great software. Really glad that we were able to offer it to our partners. And it was very, very helpful as we were navigating this really difficult space, particularly around voting rights this time around. So thank you.
So, thanks for those words. I really appreciate the endorsement.
Thank you so much for having me. I can't say enough about InView, and just really appreciate the opportunity to share more about what we've been doing in Georgia.
Awesome. Well, definitely, we've shared your email addresses in the chat. We will be sending attendees the replay of this webinar, and that'll have also your contact information for anyone who wants to reach out directly to Ashley or Adam. And again, my name is Yemi Adeomi. I'm one of the co-founders of Civic Eagle. And if you're interested in legislative software, the one that Adam and Ashley just mentioned, InView, what InView is a legislative tracking and policy management tool that helps organizations like theirs with tracking all state legislation across the country as well as federal legislation. And so it's a great communication platform and data platform for organizations to share really vital information about changing legislation across the country. So if you're interested in learning more about Civic Eagle, you can go to civiceagle.com. And yes, thank you so much again for your time. Really appreciate this conversation. I'm sure the audience really got a lot out of it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.